Welcome, everybody. We are so excited to be here on another episode of Apotheosis Live. And apotheosis means reaching ascension, reaching the highest point of one's divinity. And I am here with my co-host, Jeff Granville. We're going to do some quick introductions and we're going to jump right in. So, Jeff, would you like to introduce yourself? And then I'll introduce myself after.
Yeah, thank you, Geraldine. And hello, Pamela. Glad you could join us today. I am Jeff Granville. I'm a mindfulness and coherence coach through the Center for Healing Neurology here in Seattle. My amazing journey with my incredible son, McCoy, who got leukemia when he was 4, and through the medical industrial complex has led me to the chair I'm sitting in today to share the gifts that we downloaded during the journey with all of humanity. So I'm really happy to be here and doing what we're doing. Thank you.
Fantastic. And I'm Geraldine Orozco. I'm a certified hypnotherapist, pranic energy healer, quantum energy healer, Qigong master. And my primary work is to help you activate your DNA and learning how to navigate this physical body, this physical vessel. Today, we have with us a wonderful guest, Pamela Gregory, who is going to be diving into the topic of forgiveness. Pamela is an emotional wellness specialist. Pamela began her career in the health and wellness industry over 30 years ago, where she worked as a fitness trainer and nutritional consultant. In 2003, her focus shifted from emotional fitness to the healing impact forgiveness has on one's health. By blending the science of pseudo-neuroimmunology, the study of how the mind and emotions affect the immune system, and the spiritual practice of forgiveness, she developed a unique protocol called the forgiveness healing process. So without further ado, Pamela, welcome, and thank you so much for being here today. You're muted, Pamela.
There we go.
There you go.
Happy to join you both and have this opportunity to share something that I'm so passionate about, and that is the message of the healing power of forgiveness. As you mentioned in my little introduction there, I've been doing this work for about almost 20 years now. I was exposed to it in about 2005 on a conference call with some cancer research doctors. And they had done a study at the facility, and they found that everybody who had a chronic or terminal condition had a major unresolved forgiveness issue. And, and I hung up the phone, and so they had this forgiveness issue. And then they found that, when some of them were able to resolve it, they had a miraculous healing that couldn't be attributed to anything else. And when I hung up the phone, it occurred to me, I said, love and forgiveness is at the foundation of practically every religious and spiritual practice. And though we all know we should be more loving and forgiving, how many of us apply that on a regular basis? And so I started doing a lot of research in that arena, and I found that, with my coaching clients and so forth that I was already working with in personal training, and when I'd bring up the topic of forgiveness in our session, it was at the root of everybody's biggest issue. And so I kept doing more research in this area, and then eventually I was at a forgiveness conference, and that's where I met Dr. Carlos Garcia. And he was one of the first medical doctors who knew the importance of forgiveness. And it was through working with his facility back in 2010 that I really perfected this and fine-tuned this protocol with the cancer recipients. Thank you, Jeff, at the clinic there. And it's just evolved since then. It's a blended practice of EFT, a series of questions, but what I found over the years is it's not so much what's going on in our mind, but, it's very hard to heal the mind with the mind, and so the mind and the body are very connected. Obviously, you cannot separate the two. And when I started doing some research in the area of the heart and how the heart is the biggest, it's the most powerful organ in the body. And before, it was classified as a muscle, but it's actually an organ that releases hormones and that type of thing. And it affects every bit of our health. So I started blending in the heart approach to healing, and it became a heart over mind over matter approach to forgiveness and healing. with clients and patients that I work with.
Mhm. Amazing. So let's jump right into it. I'm really interested in, and in my work as well. You definitely notice that when you come to that point of understanding something, that's when the release occurs. So let's talk a little bit about the science of this. How is it that it happens? How does it affect the body? What is happening when that release, when that forgiveness is taking place, that understanding is clicking something? So can you explain what's happening then?
Well, the minute we have an angry or upsetting thought about something, something happens to us and I go into a rage, or I get triggered by an event, somebody does something that I don't like or agree with, that second that it triggers me, every one of my 50 trillion cells gets a release of a chemical from my brain that this is a problem, and so forth. And so when we understand that the moment we have an angry, upsetting thought, it floods our body with these negative chemicals or toxic chemicals that really compromise our health and our life. And so, and with Jill Bolte Taylor's work, if she's, says basically we have 90 seconds of this chemical flood hits your body and we're upset. But then after that, we can just, choose to let it go if we know we have that option. But most people don't know that. They think I'm angry, I'm going to stay angry, I'm going to be mad at you, I'm not going to talk to you for 3 days, that kind of thing, and punish you. But what we don't understand is that, most people don't understand, is that I get the original of my anger and my upset. Okay. And everybody else gets a carbon copy. So if I'm angry at you, Geraldine, I'm sending that negative energy to you, but I get the brunt of it. And then you get you get it secondarily. And so it never behooves any of us to stay angry or, trying to punish somebody else for what they did. And that's what I've come across recently, is really promoting the importance of instant forgiveness. Because when we understand we can forgive instantly, some event happens and I can, choose to stay angry for 90 seconds or longer, whatever works for me. And, I've applied this in my own life and shared it with many clients, and they too are shocked to find that, that they can really let things go sooner versus later. They didn't know they had the option, right?
Very good. So, and when we are dealing with pretty traumatic, first of all, I'd love to go back to the part about the chemicals. What happens to the body when these chemicals are, fired in the body? What is occurring to our system?
Well, let's use anger, for instance. I like anger's like when we're engaged in the feeling of anger, for instance, it's like arsenic in the body. Okay. The brain releases chemicals, floods every cell in our body. So the split second I have an angry thought, every one of my 50 trillion cells gets impacted with that. Okay. And so it's just what, but the thing is when we know that we have an option to get beyond that, it changes everything. As soon as I could change that thought from an angry, upsetting thought to a loving, forgiving thought, it changes everything back. That makes sense.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, definitely. And I've said, and in our talks, I've said one of the quotes I really love is that anger is the punishment we give ourselves for someone else's mistake. And, that really plays out because it's the physiology of our own body that feels the anger, not so much that of the other person. So with that, can you talk a little bit about like what it does on an energetic level, like on Hawking's scale of consciousness?
Yes. Well, right now, I think they said the collective consciousness is close to 200. And if people aren't familiar with Dr. David Hawkins' work, I highly recommend the book Power versus Force, because it really explains that in great detail. And when we understand that we can have an upsetting thought and, that be at that frequency and consciousness of anger, okay, that every thought I have goes out into the collective consciousness and affects everyone. Okay. So when we can elevate that, when I'm aware of the fact that I have a choice to elevate that and I can choose a loving, compassionate thought, it literally changes my frequency right then and there. My body gets it registers in my physiology as, healthy hormones hitting my body. and it just changes everything. I mean, but it affects the quality of my day. It affects the quality of everything and everyone. And that's what we don't understand, that we, every thought I have affects me and everyone else. And then when we can leap to the consciousness of love, so anger's 200, anger is 150, love is 500. Okay, and it's a logarithmic scale. So when we can leap to 500, we can literally affect the collective consciousness of 750,000 other individuals, according to Hawkins. Okay, when I first started working at the clinic, Doc said, go help the patients resolve their anger. And my first week there, I realized that it wasn't really, as important as resolving anger. Anger is 150 on the Hawkins scale. But what I found is that what's even more important than that, and more detrimental to our health than that, is being engaged in the frequencies of shame, blame, humiliation, and guilt, which are 20 and 30. So anger is a great leap to, going up the scale to becoming healthier. It's better to be angry than feeling guilty, shameful, humiliated, and that kind of thing. So when I started bringing that into the conversation, the patients healed faster. We could see it on their blood work, because it registers in their blood work. If they're stressed, that the cells are sticking together and so forth. The different cancer markers and all of that. And when they're able to resolve this stress or their dis-ease, they, it shows up. They start healing. Because disease of any type, whether, to me, I don't care if it's called cancer or addiction or, dis-ease, we're out of ease with life and we're not at peace with ourselves. And when we understand that forgiveness is a big stepping stone, or there is a stepping stone to achieve unconditional love and acceptance for ourselves and all others. Okay. And so it's a stepping stone to peace, it's a stepping stone to happiness. But if we don't forgive myself for that, what I did way back when, then it's going to play out in my life and in my body. So anger is I always say, anger is like arsenic in the body, and blame, shame, humiliation, and guilt is like arsenic on steroids. And so that's the most toxic frequency we can engage in.
For those that don't know what the Hawkins scale is, can you please explain what this range of numbers is helping us understand?
So it's a range from 0 to 1,000, and anything from 750 to 1,000 is pure enlightenment, which is like Buddha consciousness, Krishna consciousness, Christ consciousness. Okay, so it's pure enlightenment. And as we go up the scale, and supposedly in our lifetime, according to Hawkins, we only go up about 2 or 3 points in a lifetime, because we don't know what we don't know. We don't know it's an option to leap to love and embody that frequency. Okay. And so again, so as we go up the scale, I don't have the scale in front of me right now, but as we go up the scale, we just get healthier and happier as we work up the scale. I can pull that would give you the numbers of what all that.
Great. So very good. So when we're getting to the point of the forgiveness, so let's talk about the forgiveness process. Walk me through how does this affect the body, and how quick is that change? You said that it happens quite instantaneously, but let's say there is some people experience traumas for their childhood, something very traumatic that has happened to them that's very difficult to sometimes forgive. How do we work with these experiences that can be incredibly traumatic and difficult to accept?
And that's an excellent question. And the fact is, Geraldine, most of us have traumas of one degree or another. And what is considered a trauma to one person may seem like nothing to somebody else who's had a worse trauma, but to that person, that's a traumatic event. And it's not, and true forgiveness isn't really about the event itself. It's not about excusing or condoning or pardoning what somebody did. And some things, as I'm sure you've run across too, what's been done to some people, it's absolutely atrocious. it's just unbelievable what some people have endured and how they're still managing life. But what I do with the process is through a series of questions, I get to the root, what I call the root cause, or a game-changing event that took them from this place of happy, loving, forgiving child, as 95% of us arrived here as, 95% of us arrived here, perfectly happy and healthy, and then something happens. And it's that game-changing event that takes us out of pure love and the world's a loving, safe place to I've got to watch my back. Somebody dies, somebody hits me, somebody makes a remark that makes me feel stupid or ugly or not good enough or whatever, and we attach meaning to that. And so the event itself is one thing, but when we understand that we can't change the event, but if I change the way I look at it, that's how true healing comes in. I change out the meaning that I gave the event. Okay, because what happens, like in my case, for instance, my brother died when I was 11. He was 21. He died suddenly from an aneurysm. I had a really close family. We were super, bonded, and grew up in a small town, and just everything was great. And then one day he had an aneurysm and died. There was no warning or anything like that, and it devastated my family. And they never recovered. I mean, many, many, many years later. And it took, I couldn't even talk about the event 30 years later because I would start choking up like it happened yesterday. And that was, pointing to the fact that, it's, as you know, too, Geraldine, working with people, and Jeff, when we tell an event and we start crying like it happened yesterday, that's still very much alive and well in our body, right? So when we can tell the event, we know we've healed it. And so in my case, when my brother died, and this is, I tied into how the whole process evolved, but we had this game-changing event, and then something, we attach meaning to that. Okay, that for me, I attached the meaning that it's not safe to love. Okay, and it wasn't a conscious decision, but I decided, I'm going to put a wall around my heart because, love is too painful. I told my mom a few months later, I said, the next person to die in this family, I want it to be me, because I would rather die than go through that again. So, I mean, for a 12-year-old girl, that's a pretty bold statement, and I meant it. And so I didn't realize I'd made this decision until many years later when I started doing this work in the early 2000s, and I was going through a divorce at the time, and I really took that time to heal myself. I didn't realize I had a lot of anger still trapped in my body until my sister made a comment. She said, Pammy, you're so angry. I'm like, me? I didn't see myself as angry, And so I started looking at that, and I realized I did have a lot of anger in me. And coincidentally, that's the same time I came across all this, the forgiveness conference call that I was on with the cancer research doctors. And so I went to work healing myself, but I realized I had a lot of anger at my brother for dying and ruining my perfect family. He and I were super close. I know it, consciously I knew it wasn't his fault, but he really messed up my life and everybody in my family's life, right? And so I was mad at my brother. I was mad at my parents for not, they knew his blood pressure was high for a while there, and didn't get him, help. I blamed God for not saving him, and God could have, not taken him, and that kind of thing. I was angry at the doctors, and I realized I had a lot of anger going on. And so when I started applying this forgiveness work, and then I realized it's when you heal yourself that then you're able to help other people. And so I brought that into the practice. And so when I would help the patients find their game-changing event or something that happened in their childhood that was super traumatic, and then we applied the forgiveness process to it, which is really looking at it through a whole new lens of what happened. You can say my dad was a jerk, he was abusive, he was this and that, but the thing is carrying that with me isn't gonna make it any better. As long as I still believe that, that's still creating toxic chemicals in my body. So when they see that, when they change out the fact that, or understand the fact that my my dad too was abused, so abusers tend to abuse other people, whether it's sexual abuse or physical abuse, tends to run in generations after generation. And that when they start seeing their dad as a very wounded person instead, I mean, most parents don't have children to abuse them. I mean, that's not their intent. Like, yeah, I'm gonna have this baby and just make their life a living hell. That's what happens, because that's the circumstances we're born into. And, so most people are doing the best that they can with what they know, but most people just do what was done to them by their parents. And so when they start seeing that, their father too was a very wounded person, then they can look at it through new eyes based on love and truth. So to me, the best way to get there is using the heart, because when you tune into your heart and you see, was your dad really a monster, or was he a really wounded person? He's still that wounded little boy. Even if he's 58 years old, he's still wounded from when he was hurt as a little boy, and he just never resolved it. So he's acting out of his pain and suffering that has been stored in his body all these decades, and doesn't know that there's another way.
Yeah, it's really reminding me, Pamela, and thank you for sharing. I mean, that's obviously a very personal story. And as you and I know, through like the book Crisis to Creation, where we all go through some sort of life-changing event, and it makes us aware of how things are not in alignment for us, to our soul, and correcting that, seeing it with new consciousness. And it also reminds me of our conversation we had a couple of weeks ago with Thomas Verney, talking about an event-specific biological marker. And as we grow up and we go through things, we take an emotional snapshot through the lens of our consciousness at that time, our involvement at that time. And it stays in us with that lens as we grow. And as we change our circumstances, it no longer fits. So I'm really not raising a question here, but I'm just trying to show the commonality from what you've experienced and what you do in your practice to what I use in my practice, Geraldine uses in her practice, and what Thomas Verney said teaches us about cellular memory, and how when we expand our consciousness and we become more aware, and we look back on things in a new light, we can dissipate the charge and change the frequency and release that emotion that we had for the event at the time, and replace it with a new understanding and a new energy that reframes it for us and dissipates the charge. And I think, is that what the core of what you're talking about reframing it and looking at it and then releasing that negative energy so we don't repeat that energy?
Yeah, absolutely. I call the game, it's like when an event happens, it's like we plant a seed into the ground, and that outgrows this tree of pain. Okay, and we live within the branches of this tree of pain until we don't. But for most people, they know that they're not happy, and they may have a health crisis or whatever, and get into therapy and counseling, that kind of thing, or do some self-help and all of that, and they might make some progress. But oftentimes what I found is it's like cutting off a branch of the tree and then another one sprouts, and that's why all the time people will tell me, it's like, oh, I thought I resolved that, and here I go again. And so a big part of what is part of the process is when we see that we have these, I call it life themes. It could be a betrayal theme. Somebody betrayed me, when I was younger, and if my mom wasn't there and protect me from this abuser, then my mom betrayed me. Okay. And then later on in life, I marry somebody who then betrays me with my best friend, and so, and it keeps going on and on and on. And so people think, well, I've got to forgive my husband for cheating on me or whatever, my boyfriend or whatever. But it's really not about this event that's going on now. This is just a branch on the tree. So I always take it back to the first event, as far back as we can go. And even with like the EFT that I incorporate into the sessions, the EFT tapping, emotional freedom technique, even if we're not consciously aware of what it is, in the tapping process, I guide them to say, to issues known and unknown, real and imagined. Okay, so it addresses all of that. But the whole forgiveness healing process is about uprooting the tree of pain and then planting in the place, a seed of love, and then live within those branches. But most people think that it's impossible. I've been, a lot of my care recipients at the clinic will say, oh, I've had this, I'm 7 years old and my dad did this to me when I was 7, and it's too late for me to forgive now, and what I explain is that, unforgiveness is like being in prison from that event. And we don't, most of us don't realize that we have a key to get out of that prison anytime we want. I can get out today or tomorrow or next month or next year or 30 years from now or never. And people don't understand they have that option. Because this is done to me, I have to identify, I wear like a badge of honor. I'm an incest survivor, or I'm this or that. And I go through life leading with, yeah, I had this or that. And that's not who you are. That's an event that happened to you. But to define myself as, something from my past doesn't define who I am. It defines an event. But we relate to it in such a way that, this is what happened to me. It's wrong, and I'll never, get over it.
Let's talk about EFT. How does that work?
Okay, so EFT is emotional freedom technique, and basically it's a form of energy psychology. And our great friend Bruce Lipton, he's a big proponent of EFT and other energy psychologies, because, like he says, we can talk about things all day long, and you might feel better, but at the same time, it's still in the subconscious, and that's why so many things come back. And even if people think I healed something, it'll come back time and time again. Where EFT works with, it's the same energy meridians as using Chinese acupuncture. And so when you tap on these meridians that are associated with different organs, it discharges the energy and trauma that's blocked in that organ. And it's, my process is, I call it the rambling EFT, because I take the scenario of what they shared with me, their story from the past and all of that, and I put it all in, it's all like in one big pot. And we address it all, the good, the bad, how we want it to be, because you have to acknowledge what's wrong. You have to acknowledge, even though I feel like such a loser because I can't get my finances in order, I choose to completely love and accept myself. And when we can come from a place of love and acceptance, even though my finances are upside down, or even though I'm sick, and even though whatever, and to learn to start loving and accepting who we are in this moment, that's the turning point. That changes everything. So the EFT is super, super powerful. We start with a number at the beginning. They call it a SUDS number, which is, just assessing where you are, the scale of 0 to 10. And then you start tapping, and within minutes, people will actually be, whether it's a physical pain like a migraine or something else, they'll be looking like it literally fell off of them. And so it's super effective, and it just reinforces so much more that we covered in the conversation. So it's really effective in that way.
You mentioned that the points, and I also practice that. Which organs are they associated? How does the network work so that we can understand what's happening when we're tapping into that? When we tap into these points, which one of the organs are being affected? And is there a certain order that we need to follow this? And maybe you can show where those points are so we can learn. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Very good. Sure. And yes, there is an order, and it's right here. There's an order, but as far as the different organs, I'll see if I can remember. This is the karate chop area is for sadness and reversals. And this is the setup, and it's acknowledging the issue, what's wrong. Okay. And then we go to the top of the head. And this is the governing vessel. And we repeat the, even though I have this migraine, this horrible head pain and migraine. In the beginning of the eye, this is I believe the bladder. I don't have my chart in front of me. Side of the eye. This is anger and rage. Under the eye, this is the stomach. And it's for fear, anxiety, cravings, and addiction. Under the nose is guilt. Under the lip is shame. Collarbone is fear of the future. And again, I can get you the sheet, I have it somewhere, but under the arm, and this is fear of the future and anxiety. Top of the rib cage is the liver meridian, and that's associated with happiness, blockages, and so forth. And then the wrist is the triple burner. So this is like just a really powerful one overall. And then the gamut spot, which is the back of the hand between the pinky and the ring finger. This you can use with the eye movements like EMDR, or not. But so many people, just like my daughter loves this one. She does this whenever she has any kind of anxiety or whatever. My other ones in school, they're taking tests, they do this one, So it's just really, really effective.
Excellent. And just to fill in those spaces, just for people that are trying to learn about, it's very interesting, the network of the organs. But the top of the head is the governing vessel, under eyebrows, the bladder meridian, the gallbladder meridian on the side of the eye, the stomach meridian under the eye, under the nose is the governing meridian. And in the chin is the central vessel.
Mhm.
In the collarbone, it's a kidney meridian.
Right.
And then under the arm, it's the spleen.
Right.
So the interesting thing about that is those main organs are very much also connected with the chakra systems of the body. And so the storage of this information that you're literally pressing and releasing from those spaces is accessing not just emotional, but also the etheric part of that, which is the energetic storage system. And so when we're doing this, how should we proceed? Is there a way that we can, if we have a traumatic situation or we're trying to, how do we implement that with forgiveness? How do we use EFT and forgiveness?
Okay. Well, I was just pulling up the paper here. So how I use it with forgiveness is, again, it's in that, I call it the rambling forgiveness or EFT session, because I talk about the event, but then I choose how I want to see it. So even though, my dad was really abusive, I know that he was abused as well, and he didn't intend to hurt me. He just didn't know that, he was acting on his rage and that kind of thing, even though I was abused, that doesn't mean I'm not a worthy person of love, that kind of thing. So and by the way, I just want to interject something there is that the majority of our forgiveness issues are related to the family, most of them, the biggest forgiveness issues. And out of all of those, 90% of the time it's with one or both parents. Okay. So when we land here, we're supposed to feel loved and safe. Most of us do for a while. And then some event happens and I don't feel loved and safe anymore. And I go back to the game-changing event. Well, out of everybody in the world that's supposed to keep us loved and safe, it's our parents. And when they don't show up for us in the way that we want and need them to, or show us the love that we so need, we decide, back to those unconscious decisions, that I'm not lovable. If my own mom gave me up for my adoption, my own mom, hit me every day or said I was a loser and I'll never amount to anything, then, who's going to, have my back if not my mom and dad? And so that's like I said, it's almost always that. And even though we've had events in between, it goes the root again, back to the root cause is something with mom and dad. So, but again, I bring all of that in, and that's all part of the session, and it's almost always a parent that's involved. So good news for all of us parents, isn't it?
So in this trauma work, after they reach that point of realization, How can we support ourselves in integrating and holding on to that and integrating it into our everyday life?
Well, I share with them a lot of tools. I mean, first of all my sessions are recorded, so they can play this back and repeat the EFT as needed. But it's amazing. So many people after one session, and they will, have taken such a big chunk out of this trauma that's been with them so long, and it really plants that seed of healing that just keeps growing as they process everything that we cover in a session. And so I was also, I'm a big pusher of, knowledge and education. So I load them up with a lot of, whether it's talks or books or, that kind of thing to reinforce it. I also worked with a wonderful mentor back in 2008 called Dr. Michael Rice. He was the founder of Heartland, and he taught Aramaic forgiveness and has a phenomenal was a phenomenal resource for me on so many levels, and really changed the whole paradigm of forgiveness that I was teaching it. Because again, he's like, I never want you to forgive anybody for anything ever again. It's the whole forgiveness piece is canceling out what you made it mean. And so Michael has many tools on his website. It's whyagain.org. And one of the most important pieces that I use all the time with my clients is the commitment agreements. There's a commitment to yourself and a commitment to someone else. And when we start sharing or tell ourselves this morning and night, I have them read it morning and night to reinforce what we covered, it changes your whole state of being. When you start your day out with loving, supportive thoughts for yourself, it changes the whole tone of your day. And when you go to bed at night and you read this little commitment agreement, the same thing. Because when I go to bed, the thoughts that are marinating in my head are going to be what I wake up to the next morning. So if I can go to bed with loving, forgiving thoughts for myself and others, then that, like Bruce Lipton says, that's that when you're in that theta state, that's when so much healing is done without, being aware of it. It's playing in the subconscious mind while you sleep. So there's a lot of tools that I use to reinforce what we cover. But again, when the session itself takes such a big chunk out of the trauma that they're going through right now, which is, again, more often than not linked to something that happened when they were 5 years old, and they didn't connect the dots to be aware of that. It just changes everything. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and again, being at the center and finding the commonalities in all our practices is what my passion is, and coalescing them into an offering for people, because tapping works really well, and my stir technique works really well. And I had a wonderful conversation with Stephen Rudin about havening, and it's self-soothing. Mm-hmm. And him and his brother were looking into ways to calm people before surgery. They're both surgeons. And they were looking at EFT, and there wasn't much science behind it. And they did about 6 years of study. And they found, and again, the commonality with Thomas Verney about how we have an emotional snapshot in an area of our body. And it creates a body armoring, is what they call it, to an event-specific biological marker, that snapshot of the event. And the Rudins showed in their science of brainwaves that when we talk about an event, like you go back to that original branch on the tree, and I love that analogy, that you have an emotional snapshot, and the cells of your body store it in your soma by having a higher frequency. And as Bruce Lipton teaches, the membrane of the cell is actually the brain of the cell, and it allows the channels open to allow new information in, new proteins come in, and they trigger the DNA, they open it up, and they make a blueprint of it with the RNA, and then we repeat that in our body. That's what epigenetics is.
Right.
And the Rudin showed that when you do tapping and when you do havening and when you do stir technique like I use, you're creating a delta frequency, which is normally a sleeping brain frequency of rest, digest, and heal. But you're doing it in a waking mind, so that when you are tapping, you're creating a delta frequency, and it entrains that cellular dissonance back to the normal resonance of your body, and it releases that trauma virtually instantly. So again, we're reframing an event by creating a different energy now than the energy that it was stored in. So I just am bringing this up to show the commonality of all the different modalities, but how it affects our physiology to release the trauma is all the same. And it's such a beautiful commonality, but it's reinforced. One reinforces the other. It's not havening or EFT or EFT or stir. We have different modalities, but the commonality of all of them is how it gets our physiology to release that stored trauma, so that new information, like Vernie said, our original perfect blueprint is a quantum code in the electromagnetic field of our heart, but it's body armored away from the soma to give that correct information so that we don't relive that trauma. So I think your way of describing it and the way you practice it is beautiful. And I want to lead into a question, because one of the things you talk about, Hawking's scale of consciousness, and the higher on the scale, the more energy we put out into the world collectively, the more we have to offer for ourselves and the entire collective consciousness. And we've talked about joy before, because joy actually registers higher than love. And as I've said before, like the common practice of Ho'oponopono, the essence of all our souls are peace, joy, and love. They're natural states of being, and they don't have a human opposite. So can you talk to us a little bit about, in Ho'oponopono, they talk about getting to zero, and through my breath work, we get to zero. But from zero is where the fun is, where the excitement is, where we can really make a change in ourselves. So you can't really be at the essence of your soul in joy if you're harboring anger and not forgiving somebody. So there's a lot of energy used to store anger and non-forgiveness.
Right.
Can you talk about what happens in our physiology when we release that and replace it, transmute it with energy of joy?
Well, that's a great analogy. I mean, thank you so much for that, because you're spot on. I mean, and I love how you get in the science of it, and the detail of that, because with me, I'm more like big picture and theory, and so when I share it with my clients, it's just like, why do we have to, use the heart? Well, the heart's 5,000 times more powerful, I believe, magnetically, and about 100 times more powerful electronically, right? Got that right? And so I equate it, it's to, you can have 5,000 qualified, housekeepers come clean your house, or you can have one with an attitude clean your house. Who's going to do a better job? So yeah, but again, without forgiveness, and my real agenda here is teaching unconditional love and acceptance for ourselves and all others. But forgiveness is a step to get there. It's the last hurdle we have to jump to achieve unconditional love and acceptance for everyone. And everything starts with me. So all forgiveness is between me and me. It's, we think it's about somebody else or who done me wrong or whatever, but they've moved on and they don't know or care. They're too worried about who done them wrong, right? But the forgiveness piece, if that's not addressed, then peace isn't available to us, love isn't available to us, and certainly joy. If I'm carrying this resentment with me from what happened 20 years ago, even if I'm not thinking about it, it's still in there. So I tell people all the time, I said, if it's in there, it's going to show up in your life in some way. And it's like a piece of, rotten chicken in your refrigerator. I can put, baking soda in there and, hide it behind lettuce leaves or whatever. But as long as it's in there, it's going to stink up the place. And that's what happens when we get triggered. I'm always quite happy to get triggered, because I tell people all the time, our triggers are our friend. They're not there to ruin your day or, whatever. But when we can look at their triggers as our friend, then we embrace it. And knowing it's like, oh, Jeff, thank you for, what you triggered in me was, some anger. Will you support me in healing that? Or if we're not talking, I'm going to go and, work on that myself. But it's like, wow, what Jeff said really brought up some anger in me. Where's that? What's that connected to? It's not because you're a jerk and rude and all this other stuff, which I can project that and say that's, just write it off, but it's still in there. So when we get triggered or we get this charge, that's a great opportunity to go in and say, oh, okay, this is what's going on with me. This is the meaning I gave it. I don't need to keep that anymore. If I change the meaning I gave it, the other day I had something go down with one of my daughters, and, it's like, oh, she should have done this or that. And I'm like, okay, stop the process. Okay, she's going through a lot right now, just chill and let it be, instead of making her wrong, or, oh, she doesn't care, all this whole story we can come up with, that doesn't serve me and it doesn't serve her, So again, the whole forgiveness piece is so exciting. And even in the last few years, I'm really promoting the instant forgiveness, because back to one of my daughters a few years ago, I just got my car out of the shop from another incident. And I was running out to a meeting, and my daughter ran out for something. And she said, instead of telling her to park out front, she ended up parking in the garage. And because she was kind of in a rush, because, we were late, she scraped the side of the car. And she comes in and she said, Mom, she's like kind of dinged the car. And I'm like, how bad? She was, it's kind of bad. And she goes, you want me to come down with you? I'm like, no, I'm late already. I have to go. So I go down there and I see it. And I'm like, it's pretty bad, right? And again, just got in the car out of the shop and this whole thing. And, I no more than pulled out and got to, block away at the first light. I'm standing there and I'm parked there and I'm thinking, I can go into my meeting angry and, whatever, or I can call her right now and say, it was an accident, and most, again, I go back to intention, is it somebody's intention to be a jerk or to cut you off on the road or whatever? And no, they're dealing with their own stuff. And so when we can send compassion to somebody who's driving like a crazy person, it's like, bless them, I hope they get there safely, and everybody around them does too. We can choose in any moment that we're presented with throughout the day to come from this place of love and acceptance and compassion, because we're all dealing with stuff 100% of the time, whether we're giving attention to it or not. So
one of the things that I find is actually really, really hard for us is that when we go down the process of identifying what creates this anger and this disconnect for us, in the process of forgiveness, that people can find to forgive the other. But all of these emotions that we're harboring in the body, we're causing ourselves a lot of harm, chemically, emotionally, mentally. And we need to process a certain moment, the forgiveness towards the self. And that is actually one of the hardest things for people to do. There is a disconnect between an understanding that everything that we're doing to ourselves is because of these thoughts that we're creating. And that really causes a major realization in the input that we put into how we see ourselves and how we present ourselves in the world. So do you have any advice in how we can begin that process of forgiveness of the self? And what does it mean to forgive the self?
Well, bottom line is all forgiveness is really self-forgiveness, because no matter what happened to me, I made up the story about what happened at that event. I decided my dad's a jerk, and my dad was so wonderful to me. So I just use that as I'm not calling Dad out here. He's a loving angel above. But we can sit there and, again, blame other people. But again, as long as I'm in blame or he did this to me, bottom line is somewhere along the way, I either scripted that into my life or whatever. Whatever your belief is, I believe we scripted it all, the good, the bad, the ugly. And but it's here because we're here to grow and evolve our soul, And so when these events happen, and it's about forgiving somebody else, the bottom line is, really all forgiveness is self-forgiveness, because I'm the one who chose to carry this with me for 40 years, and so forth. But what people don't understand, and even with what I love Bruce Lipton's work, is like, and he'll say cancer, 95% of the time, even if you have a cancer gene, it's not hereditary. Like the BRCA gene, for instance, 50% of the people with the BRCA gene get cancer. Well, why don't the other 50% get it? You see? And so why aren't we studying what are they doing where they didn't express that gene and have the gene turn on to bring forth cancer? Okay. And so when we come from a place of, self-forgiveness, and knowing that, okay, I made up, this is what happened. I made it mean this, but how well is this working for me? It's causing me sadness, trauma. I've got a disease I'm dealing with or whatever, and it's not. And again, that's where the forgiveness piece comes in. I can set myself free at any moment I choose to, and by changing the story. And so when we realize we have 100% power to change everything in our life, and forgiveness sets so many positive things into motion, because we're on a very positive frequency and attracting what we want into our life versus, the blame frequency, which is attracting a lot of the worst things ever. So
amazing. Thank you so much. Well, Pamela, where can people connect with you? Where can we get in touch with you in order to get your services? What websites? Shout out to your work.
Is PamelaGregory.com, and it has quite a bit of information there under the documents for the tabs for forgiveness or cancer counseling, or I do quite a bit with addiction as well. But again, to me, it's holding the space. And one of the things that is so important, and I really want to impress upon this, that I see the divine in each person I meet. And I thought everybody did. I mean, I didn't know that was. So when I can show up and work with you, Geraldine, or whoever's sent to me, I believe God sends me everybody I work with. I just lost my train of thought. What was the question?
We were talking about seeing the divine.
Okay. Yes. And so, but when we see the divine in each other, we also see it in ourselves. And so when we hold the space for somebody that, Geraldine, you're absolutely perfect the way you are. And when I can see you that way through resonance, and Jeff, I learned a lot from your videos with your son, the resonance, I can hold that space for you of that you are perfectly divine the way you are. Then you can too, then you can rise up to meet me there. That makes sense? So just wanted to interject that. But yeah, through my website, PamelaGregory.com. I'm on Instagram, Facebook, pretty much all over the place.
Amazing. And we have a question from the audience. It says, so we can't heal until we discover that we are the ones who asked for the certain trauma to happen?
Well, again, we don't know that when did we ask for it? I mean, and again, that can go into a lot of different beliefs. And but when we understand that whatever happened, I can either love it or hate it, but it's easier if I accept it, change what you can change, accept what you cannot. And so if I can't change what happened 30 years ago. But what happens so often is that event happened once, but then I've been telling the story for 30 years. So I'm doing it, I might have been abused, 30 years ago, but because I've been telling the story for 30 years, I've abused myself every time I've told that story, because my physiology, my brain chemistry and all of that doesn't know if the event's happening right now or 30 years ago. So in terms of abuse, that might have been done to me once, but then by keeping that story alive and well, I'm abusing myself even more than the abuser. And that's where the self-forgiveness comes in. And again, like go back to Bruce Lipton, it's when people get cancer and they said, oh, I didn't know, by a lot of the choices I made that I could have contributed to giving myself cancer. And, before, we'll always think it runs in the family and so forth, but through epigenetics, we see that that's not necessarily, there's a greater likelihood that it's not an automatic 100%, yes, you're going to get it, and so when he shares that, you didn't know what you didn't know. And so now that you know better, you do better kind of thing. And so that's really, really important, whether it's self-forgiveness or trying to resolve a chronic or terminal condition. You didn't know that carrying the stress and anger with you was compromising your health and your life. So now you do. Now you can go about the steps to eradicate it.
And we have one other question from Tesseract that is asking, aren't we lying to ourselves if we deny the cause of the problem? So are we denying, or what are we actually doing when we're looking at this in a different way?
When we're putting the cause of the problem on somebody else?
Yeah, so for example, when they are in the process of forgiveness, are they denying what's occurring in that moment? Or are they, accepting what's happening? So let's talk about the process. So I guess what they took from that is that maybe, is it that we're denying what actually happened? How is it that we're changing our perception about what's occurring in that moment?
Yeah, we're not denying what happened. I mean, events happen, and again, absolutely atrocious events have, happened for people. So it's not denying it at all. But again, me being so upset about what happened all those years ago, if I keep carrying that, blame and anger with me, it's going to destroy me. And that's why so many people, start getting, chronic and terminal conditions at 40 and 50 and 60. It's not because we just happen to hit those ages that we fall apart. We fall apart because of these issues that we're carrying with us that we've never resolved. And, the body can only take it so long. So it's not about denying it at all, but it's quite the opposite. It's fully embracing it and seeing it, again, through a heart-based perspective, seeing it based on love and truth, which is from the heart, and versus the mind that said, this should have never happened. I'm broken. I will never be, okay. And nobody's ever going to want me because this happened to me. All of this stuff that goes along with that. That's all mind, left brain thinking. So.
And we have another question that's asking, how can we play this out in the criminal justice system? How can we implement this in the larger systems of our reality? Have you looked at how that may be possible?
You mean to work with people in the criminal justice, like inmates?
Yes. I guess they're asking, in the criminal justice system, if we were to implement this kind of therapy or this work for this kind of severe crimes that are occurring, how can we do that? Do you have any insight on how that could be possible? Or is that a good idea?
Oh, of course, I think it's a great idea. I mean, most of them. I mean, you look at the situation and who's in the prison system, and it's, across the board, kids, and I call everybody basically kids, and we're all adults, 8-year-olds and wearing adult clothes, so people in the prison system, most of them had a really challenging childhood. A lot of them are illiterate, they couldn't get jobs and that kind of thing. And, they didn't feel good about themselves, or, there's so much, Gabor Mate has such amazing work out there. He did this whole Wisdom of Trauma series and all of that. And it's just amazing. And he has so much, so many resources to understand the importance of resolving trauma. Now, the thing is we can understand, I need to resolve my trauma. How do I do it? That's why it's like, I need to forgive, but how do I do it? And those in the prison system, need it, more than anybody, because they feel, how do you face the fact that I've got to sit here for 20, 30 years, And so, it's very, and most of them, there's a wonderful man I met whose 9-year-old son was shot and tragically killed just from some, it was an initiation for a gang member. A 14-year-old boy shot and killed his 19-year-old son just as an initiation thing. And he was doing well in school and, just had his whole life in front of him and was the only son of this man. And just one day got the call that his son had been murdered, and in a senseless murder of just violence. And he was, of course, so full of rage, as often happens, and all of that. But then he learned that, this was killing him. And he went and met with the young man that did this, got 40-year sentence or something like that. And started, understanding where he came from and his background and all of that. And again, when we can see where people come from, it's like, that's why I can't judge anybody, because when we judge, we're not loving, and we assume all of these things. But again, they're not bad people. They've just had, a lot of trauma in their childhood that led them to make poor choices, that led them to go to prison. And but with this man, he ended up befriending this son, or this young man in prison who killed his son. And now the guy's about ready to get out, and he is going to be touting, because the father forgave him. They started working together, and now he's coming out with a message, to people who have made these choices to not only forgive themselves but take a better path, in the future. But I mean, what a powerful message from somebody who's been, on the inside and healed this, and offset that so other people don't make those same poor choices.
That's true. I also see that in the countries that are establishing rehabilitation centers for drug use instead of putting them through the criminal, justice process. I mean, they have an incredible shift in the amount of violence that is in their country. So that's something that we can all learn from. But of course, there is resistance from larger systems that benefit from that, unfortunately. But it really speaks to the work that we can do in our own lives, in our own healing, that if we would address the trauma at an early age, or the moment that it begins to fester and create, distrust and turmoil, this is where we can begin to shift our lives into a direction that is more constructive and healing and productive and creative, as opposed to counter-creative. So that's incredible. Well, thank you so much. It was such a wonderful pleasure to have you here. And Jeff, any final notes?
No, I appreciate it as well. And I just want to point out the commonality. I mean, even going back to Thomas Verney interview a couple of weeks ago, where, he wrote the book, The Secret Life of the Unborn Child. The social environmental influences, I mean, besides a soul contract of what we're playing out being here, as you said, Pamela, the influence the parents have, and trauma is generally inflicted from the parent to the child. And we have a future guest, Scarlett Lewis, whose son was shot in the Sandy Hook shooting, and she has the Choose Love Foundation. Well, it's hard to choose love until you can forgive. And she has chosen to forgive and choose love for even the perpetrator. So if you look at Thomas Verney talking about how we're doing this generationally and how we know what we're passing down DNA-wise and the effect we have on children and how that plays out, instead of just locking them away in cells as punishment, we have to look at why they're there as a society and do what we can to eliminate the, it's like I say, if you want to eliminate child or adult drama, eliminate childhood trauma, right? So I think this all plays in, and it's all common. And again, the coalescing of all this information into one unified message of how we can be in the moment, reframe things, and forgive ourselves and others, and choose love, and then vibrate at that higher frequency and really affect the global consciousness. So I really love your message. I love what you do, and it really contributes to the overall coalescing of this information for all of us to bring to humanity in all of our work. So thank you for what you do.
It's really wonderful being here. I really thank you both for sharing your wonderful stage with me. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Wonderful. Well, for everyone that's tuning in, thank you so much to all the amazing comments and questions, and a major shout out to Angie and to Joyce Hartman. Thank you so much for your support. We love you very much, and we're so pleased to have you here. Let me just pull up our next guest for next week. Um, Jeff, what is the name of the person that will be speaking next week?
Yeah, we have a wonderful guest who graciously came in and took a spot that was evacuated by Scarlett. But we have Dr. Alex Schmidt, who works with trauma, and she's a psychotherapist that works in the prison system, in the jail systems with perpetrators and victims.
Mhm.
And so that's really a perfect lead in from where we end up and where we're going next week. So I think she too is going to add a lot of insight on how trauma is placed in us generationally and how we can come to zero and release it and then create from zero.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Well, we are so excited and we look forward to that. Thank you once again. And please do connect with Pamela Gregory. Her website and her links are below for you to connect and work with her on this amazing forgiveness journey for healing. Thank you so much to everybody that's joining us. And I hope you have an incredible week. See you soon.
Thank you both. Thanks,
Much
everybody.
love.